Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. Those of you here who are here in person, those of you who are watching online, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this discussion on the U.S. Japan alliance agenda. I'm Chris Johnstone. I'm the new Japan chair and senior advisor here at CSIS, and I'm really delighted to have a terrific panel with us to discuss this topic. I'll offer a few framing remarks and then I'll introduce our guests and we'll get started in the conversation. I think it goes without saying that it's been an eventful few weeks in Japan and in the U.S.-Japan relationship. The passing of former Prime Minister Abe was a deeply tragic event and has prompted extensive commentary about the role that he played both in the U.S.-Japan relationship and in Japan's role in the world. And if you're like me, you're no doubt still trying to process the events of July 8th. But our purpose here today is to look forward and to explore the agenda in the U.S.-Japan relationship following the upper house elections that were held earlier this month, and the role that Japan plays in the U.S.'s larger agenda in the Indo-Pacific. In my view, the coming months will be a particularly consequential period in the evolution of the U.S.-Japan alliance, particularly in the national security agenda that includes a number of economic issues as well. To offer a few framing remarks up front, I mean, as we think about Prime Minister Kishida as he approaches the one-year mark in his tenure, I think it's fair to say that he has impressed many with his leadership on the world stage. When he assumed office in September of 2021, following closely on the heels of Prime Minister Suga and his brief time in office, there were frankly concerns here in Washington that we were entering a period of revolving door leadership in Tokyo. But he's defied expectations. He quickly joined the G7 in imposing sweeping sanctions on Russia following the invasion of Ukraine and has provided robust support to Kyiv. He sought to rally the Indo-Pacific region to the cause, warning in the speech in Singapore quite famously that Ukraine today could be East Asia tomorrow. He sustained a high diplomatic tempo, hosting the Quad in May, joining the NATO Leaders Summit for the first time in June, meeting regularly with leaders in Southeast Asia and beyond. And his leadership was instrumental in getting the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, President Biden's signature regional economic initiative, off to a successful launch in Tokyo during the president's visit in May. So now, with the upper house election behind him, poised to take on his consequential national security agenda, one that he largely deferred until after the elections. So now really is the time when the real work begins. The government plans to draft a new national security strategy, the first since the first in 2013. It's exploring significant increases in defense spending and new capabilities, including long-range counterattack capability. And next week, the United States and Japan will convene the very first meeting of the brand new forum, the Economic 2+2, which is aimed at deepening cooperation on a host of what's loosely called economic security issues, including the protection of critical technologies, promoting supply chain resilience, and cooperating on export controls. The launch of this forum is one of the most significant new institutional evolutions in the relationship in some time. So taken together, this is a consequential period that we're entering into this fall, and I'm really pleased to be joined by two real leaders in the U.S. government, driving the relationship with Japan, driving the government's strategy toward the Indo-Pacific, Edgard Kagan and Pamela Phan. I'll start with Edgard, Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania on the National Security Council, a long and impressive career in the Foreign Service, Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in India, Deputy Director at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations, Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asia and Pacific Affairs, and Director of Korean Affairs, served in embassies in Australia, China, and Malaysia. And perhaps most consequentially, I had the opportunity to work for Edgard on the NSC until about a month ago. Pamela Phan, to my right, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Asia at the International Trade Administration in the Department of Commerce. She spent nearly 10 years at the Department of State before joining the Department of Commerce. as Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs, and as the department's liaison to the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. She's played a leading role in numerous U.S. investment treaty and free trade agreement negotiations across 3 U.S. administrations. So the way we'll do this today is I'll invite each of them to make some opening comments. I'll follow up with some questions, and we'll have a bit of a conversation up here, and then we'll reserve time at the end for questions, both in the room. There's a microphone right there that you'll be able to line up in front of at the time, and we'll take questions online as well. So thanks to both of you for joining us. And Edgard, let me give you the floor first.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I am so happy to see so many people here. And I'm really grateful to you for inviting me and for organizing this. I think the timing, as you said, is very appropriate. And I just want to say what a tremendous loss it is to the National Security Council to lose Chris, and more broadly to the U.S. government. He's served so well for so many years, but it's great to see him here in this capacity, and I think that he's already shown an ability to really help the discussion and help the way we think about Japan in the brief time he's been here, and I'm very confident he will become an even more influential force on the relationship and on U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy in coming years. I think to start off with, I think it's really important to just stress the shock, the degree of sadness at the loss of former Prime Minister Abe. Things move so quickly in today's world. It's hard to believe that it's only been a week and a half. But I think the impact on the relationship is quite significant. And it's a loss of someone who was a tremendous force in how I think Japan and the United States and many other countries thought about the Indo-Pacific and what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. And I think his legacies can be seen in many areas, but it's really just the shock of this is something that I think we're still grappling with. I think, we note that President Biden was very, very concerned, obviously very upset at the loss of someone that he had worked with and that he knew, and that for whom he had tremendous respect. Also very concerned about the impact of something like this on another country and on our relationship. And I think you can see from the things that he did, including visiting the Japanese ambassador's residence on last Friday, to really signal his personal concern and his understanding of the importance of friends supporting each other at difficult times. And I think that really captures in many ways how the relationship has evolved over the years. There is a degree of intimacy, a degree of warmth between the leaders that has existed at different times, but I think has become much more ingrained because we are doing so much more together. And I think that from the Biden-Harris administration's perspective, it was very important from the beginning to both emphasize the focus on the Indo-Pacific, a recognition that the Indo-Pacific is critical to the United States, not just today, but to our prosperity and our security in the coming years and coming decades, and that we needed to continue to increase the focus on the region, following on the footsteps of the previous few administrations that had all also recognized the importance of the region and done their own efforts to increase U.S. engagement, U.S. focus. But I think that the president gave very clear guidance of the importance of Japan and strengthening our relationship with Japan, broadening, deepening the alliance, but also looking for new areas in which we can work together in the region and beyond. And as Chris, I think, gave a very good overview of the number of ways in which we are working together now. So I think that the significant thing to me as I look at the U.S.-Japan relationship is the degree to which cooperation is becoming a habit. And areas where in the past there were sometimes very different views, we now think and act increasingly in aligned ways. And I think obviously the best example is the response to the invasion of Ukraine. But I think that more broadly it is, and I think this is something that really reflects the influence of former Prime Minister Abe, the way of thinking about the region and thinking about challenges to the region and the need to support a rules-based international order that will preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific. And so, from the invitation to Prime Minister Suga to be the first foreign guest at the White House in the administration, to the focus on the Quad and taking the Quad to the leader level, to working with Japan, not just for the first Quad meeting, which was virtual, but also the first in-person meeting in the fall, to looking to Japan as we built out and sort of thought more broadly about our partnership with ASEAN, to obviously the response to the invasion of Ukraine, to doing another Quad meeting, which I think having a second in-person meeting in Tokyo really helped drive home the greater role that the Quad plays for all 4 countries that are involved, as well as the aspirations to provide public goods in a meaningful way to the region. I think all these things are done with Japan very much at the center. In terms of how we look at the world, how we think of the region, and how we think of our broader strategy. If you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy that we rolled out in February, I think it very much is in keeping with the shared vision of having an affirmative, positive role in the region that is designed to work with countries to support their own aspirations in a way that keeps the Indo-Pacific free and open. So I think that we have, in my view, we are at a point in the relationship that has been very rarely achieved in terms of not just the relationship between the leaders, and I think Chris captured very well the respect that we have for Prime Minister Kishida and the way in which he has been a very assertive and very effective player on foreign policy, but also the way in which we've institutionalized at virtually every level of government the ability to work closely together with Japan. So for us, this is very much part of what we see as a critical component of the operating system of the region and how the U.S. will engage. And what we're also seeing is the more we do together, the more opportunities we see to do more. And I think that that's starting to become ingrained in what we do in ways that I think will continue to bring benefits. So I think in particular, if you look at things that we've done on technology, things that we've done on 5G and Open RAN architecture, I think it reflects how much potential there is in the relationship and a very high level of ambition from the administration, and I think supported in a bipartisan way from Congress and more broadly across American society to build out this absolutely critical partnership.
Thank you, Edgard. Terrific. Pam, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's certainly a pleasure to be here and to be sharing the stage with Edgard and Chris, whom I've gotten to know quite well over the past several months working on these issues. We've been talking about the context in which we're having this conversation about the U.S.-Japan alliance and the fact that the rules-based international order that the United States has historically driven together with our allies and like-minded partners, it's really been challenged by some new global geopolitical realities. We are seeing from the events of the past few months, year, greater aggression by countries that do not necessarily share the same values as the United States and Japan share. And their voices and their presence, as those grow, so does their ability to influence the rules of international trade and commerce. The treaty alliance that exists between the United States and Japan, it really has served as a cornerstone of a peaceful and prosperous world order, and one that really has been built on common values, such as a belief in democracy, the rule of law, market-based economic principles. And we've mentioned Japan's late Prime Minister Abe. He certainly was a champion of our bilateral alliance and a tireless promoter of our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and for stronger regional ties, including through frameworks such as the Quad. Certainly his leadership and his guidance will be missed dearly. Recognizing how important it has been for free and democratic nations to work together to address emerging global threats, the President and Suga did announce in April of 2021 the Competitiveness and Resilience Partnership, or the CORE Partnership, as we call it. What the CORE Partnership does is serve as a foundation to ensure that together the United States and Japan can actually help lead a sustainable, inclusive, healthy, and green global economic recovery. We do this in part by promoting greater competitiveness and innovation, by strengthening our COVID-19 response, and by responding to the challenges of climate change. Soon after Secretary Gina Raimondo became our Secretary of Commerce, she worked to establish a new bilateral mechanism with her counterpart in Japan, who leads the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, or METI. Working with METI, the Department of Commerce has launched what we call the Japan-U.S. Commercial and Industrial Partnership. It's quite a mouthful, JUSIP for short. We launched that in November of 2021, and so several months after the core partnership had been established. And what we've been trying to do under JUSIP is to identify areas of cooperation that can help us further some of the goals that have been identified under the core partnership. The specific areas of cooperation that we've been focusing on in JUSIP include semiconductor supply chains, export controls, the digital economy, and trade and investment, all areas that are really ripe for the United States and Japan to be working together. At a technical level, experts convene fairly regularly. We collaborate to align priorities and to build out programming to further advance these shared objectives. And at a more senior level, we were able to hold our first ministerial meeting, bringing together Secretary Raimondo with METI Minister Kishida in May of this year. That was just a few weeks, actually, before she traveled out to Tokyo. We have been taking a step beyond just that Department of Commerce METI partnership and working together with the State Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on what Chris referred to as the 2+2. So in January of this year, the President had announced that Japan and United States would be jointly establishing what we call the Economic Policy Consultative Committee, another mouthful. EPCC, what the Japanese sometimes like to refer to as EPIC, or the 2+2, the Economic 2+2. It takes a page from the existing 2+2 template that exists and is common in bringing together the Department of State and the Department of Defense with counterparts in various countries to talk about significant issues. Increasingly, as economic security is being recognized as national security, the need and the urgency for an economic 2+2 has become more apparent. And in launching this 2+2 with Japan, we are committing to work with our Japanese counterparts to track and to drive the bilateral partnerships and the work streams that we have established under JUSIP, our commerce dialogue with our counterparts, as well as more broadly under the core partnership. The 2+2 convened at the Undersecretary Vice Ministerial level in May in preparation for the joint ministerial. And the joint ministerial will be convening next week on July 29th, actually here in Washington, hosted over at the State Department and bringing together Secretary Raimondo and Secretary Blinken with their counterparts from METI and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's certainly a timely event, and the launch of 2+2 is timely in that we are both countries that are grappling right now with the reality that economic security is national security, and that is made all the more clear coming out of the pandemic. That's really upended some of the underpinnings of our modern economy, and coming out of the events in Ukraine as well, which has caused significant disruptions to supply chains and a whole host of other economic issues. Japan has recognized for quite some time that it has needed to embrace this concept of economic security. And it did so initially in October of last year by establishing a new cabinet-level position in the form of a Minister for Economic Security. And then in May of this year, May 11th, Japan saw the passage of a new economic security promotion law. There's a recognition reflected in that law that Japan is facing economic vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities have become more apparent as we see increasing competition in the Indo-Pacific region, a more assertive People's Republic of China, and an uncertain global environment. And so as we have engaged with our counterparts, our understanding of the new law is that it focuses in particular on the very issues that we have been trying to advance working together with the Japanese, and those include the strengthening of supply chains, the protection of critical infrastructure, preventing leakage of sensitive technology, especially into the hands of those who might misuse or abuse it, and then greater development of advanced critical technologies, an area where both the United States and Japan have a cutting-edge leading expertise and can work together. Our shared interests have really made it apparent that we can leverage the economic 2+2 to start figuring out solutions for promoting economic growth and addressing threats to the global economic order and enhancing economic security and resilience. And so next week at the ministerial level, it's really an opportunity for us to share information in a way that can help strengthen the bilateral alliance, but also provide strategic guidance for the work at the technical level that we have been doing with Japanese counterparts. I think it's going to be important when we convene next week for the principals to assess whether or not we're doing enough and to really sharpen our existing mechanisms to make sure that we're on the right track as we try to work together to solve these problems. And there certainly are plenty of problems to talk about. So with that, I'll just conclude by saying that at the end of the day, whether it's through JUSEP or through the 2+2, we are looking to work together with Japan on concrete initiatives that can help deliver results not only for our own respective populations, but for the Indo-Pacific and for the broader world stage. And with that, I'll turn back to you, Chris.
That's great. Thanks, Pam, and thanks, Edgard, for the really great overviews, I think. Let me start with a question maybe for you, Edgard, referencing this national security agenda that's on the plate for Japan this fall, and in particular this question of defense spending. Prime Minister Kishida told the president, committed to the president to a substantial, the word was substantial, increase in defense spending. And then there's also this discussion about counterattack capabilities. How do you think about this from the White House? How important is this discussion of 2% that we've seen in Japan? How are you looking at this consideration in Japan of new capabilities that are potentially quite transformative for the alliance?
Thanks, Chris. And I think that you know from your time at the White House, this is obviously something that's of great interest. I think first and foremost, one of the key principles in this is that these are ultimately decisions for Japan. We have a great deal of respect, and we're used to working with the Japanese system, and we are very well aware that these are decisions that the government and the people of Japan need to make for themselves. That said, I think it is very clear. We believe that there are very substantial challenges in the region, that we have long sought for Japan to look to do more on security, and so we welcome this discussion. I think we want to be very mindful of the fact, as I said, these are decisions for the government and the people of Japan, but that the ability to do more will be to the advantage of both of our countries. I think that in terms of the exact systems and capabilities, again, these are decisions for the government and the people of Japan. But we believe, and we've long argued for greater capabilities throughout the region as a way of trying to ensure that we're able to respond to the very clear threats from the DPRK as well as from others. And that, I think a broader goal of the administration from the beginning of its time in office has been to try and ensure that there is a strategic balance in the region, and that in Japan that is able to shoulder greater burdens is obviously going to be very helpful in that regard.
That's great, thanks. Maybe turning to the Russia component for just a second. I mean, we've talked here about the striking solidarity that Japan has shown to date with the West in responding to the invasion. At the same time, it's quite clear that Russia continues to seek to drive wedges. And its actions with respect to the liquid natural gas project, Sakhalin-2, are one example of that, the potential threat to nationalize and pressure the Japanese firms that are there. I wonder, are you concerned at all about the ability to sustain solidarity with the Japanese and our other partners, for that matter, in dealing with the Russia challenge, given the way they seek to play this game?
Look, it's a great question. I think that the short answer is that we are extraordinarily confident and grateful for Japan's very, very strong steps, and above all, the spirit with which it's taken those steps. I think that, at the very beginning of this, I think that there were questions, and there were questions in many places about what would the reaction of countries be to an invasion of Ukraine. I think that what we've seen in the case of Japan, and in quite a few other places as well, is remarkable solidarity. And I think that we expected that Japan would be supportive of a strong response. But at every stage, Japan has gone further and faster than I think many people would have expected. And what we see is a deep understanding on the part of the government, and particularly Prime Minister Kishida, of the tremendously dangerous implications that the invasion of Ukraine has, not just for the broader Indo-Pacific, as well as obviously the extraordinary threat that it poses to Europe and the devastation it's causing Ukraine, but also to Japan. And so what we have seen is a Japan which has been extraordinarily forthcoming, that has shown real leadership. I think that it's worth noting that it is not alone in this. And I think that one of the things that I think has been striking for us is that if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was released immediately before the invasion of Ukraine, we talked about and we highlighted the greater interest on the part of many players in Europe to be more engaged in the Indo-Pacific. But I think what we're also seeing is that the countries in the Indo-Pacific are actually much more concerned about what is happening in Europe. And so this traditional model that there's sort of a division between Europe on one hand and the Indo-Pacific on the other, I think no longer holds as true. Because we've seen, in addition to Japan, we've seen the ROK, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore all take very strong actions in response to this for their own reasons, with their own interpretation of what's at stake. So I am actually confident that there's a great alignment in how the U.S. and Japan look at this. I'm not worried, at least in the short and medium term. Long term, obviously, who knows how things will play out. But I think that there is a clear understanding on the part of the Japanese government that this is a tremendous threat to the world, to the region, and to Japan, and that we need to work together to respond effectively.
Great, thanks. Pam, for you, maybe turning to the economic side a bit, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you, as you contemplate the first ministerial economic 2+2 next week, and talked about the G-7 and the agenda that you were pursuing there. How do you see the division of labor between these two mechanisms? It feels like there's a number of channels in which we have discussions with the Japanese about economic security related issues. I think that the dialogue that USTR has might be another forum. How do you see this breaking down? And then on top of that, as I think you know, the alliance, the traditional defense 2+2 has a fairly elaborate infrastructure underneath it, right? There's an assistant secretary level venue, a deputy assistant secretary level. So there's, a large architecture there. I'm wondering, how do you see the economic 2+2 structure evolving over time? Maybe it's too soon to say, but interested in whatever thoughts you may have on that score.
Sure, thanks for those questions, Chris. I'll start with the question about the various dialogues that currently exist that allow for us to engage with Japanese counterparts. You mentioned USTR's Partnership for Trade. Certainly different agencies have different interests and equities and expertise that they're contributing to these conversations. The conversation about bilateral trade barriers or trade facilitation that USTR might be having in its partnership with the Japanese is different and arguably complementary to the types of things that we are discussing in our dialogue with the Japanese. We, as the Department of Commerce, have the Bureau of Industry and Security, which plays a leading role on export control issues. We in the International Trade Administration at Commerce have teams that work on supply chain resiliency, and it's an issue that the Secretary has been very focused on and committed to. And so as we build out those areas, we're able to bring in the expertise that makes sense from a commerce perspective, and to have that ultimately feed into the 2+2 agenda. The 2+2 is not a format that has work streams in and of itself. It is designed as a format that takes a look at all of the various bilateral mechanisms that exist and assesses whether or not those are productive and are leading to the types of outcomes that we would expect working with such an important strategic partner in the region. And so, as we plan for the upcoming ministerial, we are taking a page from the State Department, Defense Department 2+2 playbook. At the same time, we're creating something that is very new. As you mentioned, it is very early on. And I think we have identified some buckets that are overarching themes under which we can discuss the progress made in our various dialogues to date. And those buckets do include promoting economic growth, addressing threats to the global economic order, enhancing economic security and resilience. Under each of these buckets, there are a whole host of issues that we can address together. And in thinking through and strategizing about how to address these issues, we can take a look and track what has been accomplished to date in the various dialogues and have this overarching mechanism allowing us to set the path for these dialogues going forward. And so in an ideal world, that is meant to be the way in which it all plays out. And we're very much looking forward to seeing how that plays out in practice next Friday.
So it sort of sits atop
It does.
and kind of gives direction, tracks, guides, drives. That's the vision. Drives the other dialogues and the work streams taking place. And I see. Yep. Good. Let me ask you a question, if I may, about IPEF. This, of course, is, I know, a big part of your agenda at Commerce. I know we're marching toward a first ministerial in the coming days. Obviously, a critical set of issues that are on the plate there. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how we're working with Japan now that we're transitioning into the phase where real talks about substance and commitments will begin. Japan was so instrumental to the launch of IPEF. How are you partnering with Japan as you develop a concrete agenda for each of the 4 pillars? And in particular, what is the state of the dialogue with Japan about how to incentivize the sort of developing economies that are part of IPEF to make robust commitments in a structure where we're not in a position to offer market access? How are you partnering with Japan to address that challenge?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for that question and for opening up the opportunity to talk about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. It goes without saying that they have been a critical partner since day one. And so I wanted to first and foremost acknowledge that. Particularly, what has continued to be relevant to us is Japan's unique knowledge of the region and their insights into how to engage with the ASEAN member countries, for example. That was relevant not only in our ability to work with these ASEAN countries to get them on board with this vision of a framework that could benefit the entire region, but today it is critical in helping us think through the types of things that could be seen as benefits by these countries and incentives for them to join in the absence of market access. As has been mentioned, we worked closely with the Japanese on the launch. IPEF was launched in Tokyo at the end of May. And when we engage, including through bilateral mechanisms such as the 2+2, that is an opportunity to also talk about our shared objective of ensuring that there are high standard rules that can be put on the table as a part of IPEF. And working with the Japanese to ensure that in those negotiations that we will be launching, the type of high standard rules that we and the Japanese are accustomed to don't get watered down in our efforts to make this a broad and inclusive framework. That's going to be critically important, and we're going to have to rely very closely on Japan for that. Prior to IPEF, the United States and Japan have had various ways in which we work together to help other countries in the region realize some of their ambitions, including climate ambition, including digital transformation ambitions. These are all part of the discussion in IPEF. We have a pillar that is focused on infrastructure, clean energy, and decarbonization. And I was actually just out in the region in Indonesia and Vietnam to engage with counterparts about how high their aspirations are when it comes to decarbonization and achieving net zero goals. They also recognize that they can't do it on their own, and that private sector capital is critical to enabling them to achieve some of these ambitions. And that's where we can have an important conversation with a partner like Japan, with whom we currently have our Development Finance Corporation collaborating with JBIC to look at project opportunities. That's the type of thing that can be pretty critical in our conversations with other countries in the region as we think through the concrete incentives that something like IPEF can offer.
Great, thanks. And Edgard, maybe just one more before we open it up to the group. I feel the need to ask you about the trilateral U.S. Japan, South Korea relationship. The summit meeting in Madrid, clearly a big step forward. There have been a variety of trilateral engagements we've seen in recent weeks and months. Very promising that the South Korean foreign minister visited Tokyo this week. What are your thoughts on the way ahead, both in terms of building a practical trilateral cooperative agenda, but also really sort of coming to terms once and for all with these history issues, if that's even possible?
Look, it's a great question, Chris, and I think that one of the things that you allude to is we've had a remarkable amount of trilateral interaction in the last 6 weeks. We've had, in addition to the leaders meeting in Madrid, which was the first meeting in a very long time, I think 6 years. We've also had the Secretary of State met with the foreign ministers in Bali, and that was a remarkably productive meeting. And also, I would note that the meeting happened on the right after the announcement that Prime Minister Abe had died as a result of had been assassinated. So at first there was the news that he'd been shot, and then the meeting happened probably about half an hour after the announcement that he'd died, and it was very emotional. And I think that both Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Pak made statements at the beginning that captured their, the sense of shock. And I think that was very powerful. I mean, in the room, you could sort of sense the emotion as a result of that. And I think that it reflected, and then it was immediately followed by a very productive discussion, very pragmatic, very practical. that I think further illustrated how much we can do together when we're able to do it. The meeting, there was also a trilateral between the defense ministers at Shangri-La. There was a trilateral with the deputy foreign ministers, deputy secretary of state, when Deputy Secretary Sherman was in the region. There have been a number of discussions between, and this was more common, between the special representatives from North Korea. And so I think that it's remarkable that there's been this much in this short a period of time. I think it does reflect both tremendous will on the part of both the new ROK administration as well as the Japanese government. And to me, it's a reflection of the reality that all of us are dealing with unprecedented challenges. You know, the DPRK's very aggressive missile testing program this year, and the continued concern about the possibility of a seventh nuclear test, I think, help drive that. But I think that it's very clear that we have increasingly shared interests across a wide range of issues in the region, and that all of us are better served by being able to work together. One of the things that you looked at the Indo-Pacific strategy that we announced in February, one of the things that we did highlight is the U.S. has an interest in improved relations between the ROK and Japan. And this is something that we recognize is extremely challenging. We recognize that there are strong domestic political drivers in each country that can make it challenging. But we do believe that in addition to the fact that that will strengthen our ability to work trilaterally, we believe that we have a broader interest in a closer, stronger relationship between our two most important allies in the region. And so I'm personally actually optimistic. I think that the initial steps we've seen from the Yoon administration definitely are positive. I think that Foreign Minister Park Jin's visit to Tokyo seems to have gone well. We're very optimistic as a result. This will not be easy. There are very complicated issues, but I think that the more that the ROK and Japan are able to do together to try and address these to the extent possible, the stronger our ability to work trilaterally will be. And I am very confident that we need trilateral cooperation to deal with the challenges that we're facing in the region.
And you're confident that we can continue to make progress on that practical agenda, even as the history issues continue to be addressed bilaterally?
I think so. Look, I think we have to be honest and acknowledge that we thought that there had been tremendous progress on trilateral cooperation in the period from, say, 2014 to 2017, and that it stalled for a variety of reasons. But I think one of them is obviously friction between the ROK and Japan. And without taking a position as to who's to blame, I think the reality is, from a U.S. perspective, if that undermines our ability to work trilaterally, that is a problem for us. And so we believe that there is an opportunity to do this. It's going to take efforts by both sides, and I think that that's important. But I also think that the desire is there. I was in Tokyo last week and have had fairly extensive discussions with the ROK run up to the president's visit. My sense is that there is real recognition on the part of both governments of the importance of finding ways to improve the bilateral relationship, in no small part for their own reasons, but also because that strengthens our ability to work trilaterally.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's open up the floor here. Also open up the online questions as well. Any questions in the room? Yes, do you want to make your way to the microphone? Why don't you sort of say who you are before you ask your question? Thanks.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Wilka. I'm from SIPA. So my question is sort of bumping from what you mentioned earlier about the trilateral relations between the ROK and Japan. Do you think it's time for the U.S. to pursue a grand strategy of away from the more hub and spoke bilateral relations-based security architecture in East Asia and pursue more or less that multilateral institution that stresses those multilateral ties, such as the trilateral relations? And if so, how should the U.S. go around navigating those sensitive barriers to that multilateral cooperation, including such as like the Liancourt Rock disputes or the and avoid close calls like the not renewing the GSOMIA agreement? Thank you.
Edgard, do you want to take a stab
Sure.
at
I think those are very good points and point to the realities that there are some significant challenges. I think that number one, I would note that what the administration has been focused on, I think does highlight a greater desire to work maybe multilaterally or perhaps minilaterally in the region. I think that we have to recognize that there's a difference between formal agreements and alliances and then the practical realities of how we work together. So if you look at trying to promote trilateral cooperation with the ROK in Japan, if you look at the Quad, if you look at AUKUS, if you look at the greater efforts to try and step up our game in the Pacific, working with the Pacific Islands Forum, if you look at the engagements with ASEAN, I think that in each of those cases, we are recognizing that we have a very strong interest in strengthening our ability to work with groupings of countries to address both broader regional challenges, but also very specific challenges. So I think that we're not at a point of having a multilateral structure that covers the entire region, and I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal, though, is to get coalitions of countries that can work together to address both specific challenges and strengthen the broader ability of the region to deal with the very serious challenges it's facing. And obviously, these include, in addition to the challenge from the DPRK weapons of mass destruction and the missile programs, we've got the challenges posed by an increasingly assertive China. We've got the challenges posed by the recovery from COVID, which is still a major, major disruptor in much of the region. We have the challenges posed by the climate change. We have the challenges posed by trying to deal with the changes in the regional structure and regional order, including the continued economic growth that is a key driver of global growth. So I think in all these areas, we have a lot that we can do. We're trying to look for ways, and I would also add IPEF as another example of trying to work with a grouping of countries to deal with challenges that we think are important for prosperity, but also which haven't been dealt with by the traditional tools and mechanisms, including supply chain disruptions, including looking at the importance of tax and anti-corruption to supporting broad-based regional growth, as well as climate. So I think in all those areas, there are benefits to working together, and we're looking at a model that goes beyond the sort of traditional hub and spoke. It is not yet, and I don't think it will become one that covers everyone. I don't think that's the goal. I don't think that that's really doable. But it is trying to find groupings that allow us to more effectively mobilize resources to address real problems.
Thanks. Jim, I think you had a question.
Thank you very much. Jim Scho from the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, USA. And I wanted to ask about the economic 2+2. Pam, as you described, I mean, these economic security issues you're dealing with are incredibly complex. Could have easily been economic 5+5 if you really want to include all the stakeholders. So my question is this. Given that there are these different gaps that we have mechanisms to work together in agency to agency, so on science and technology promotion, we have the Joint High-Level Committee on Science and Technology Cooperation. On defense innovation, we have the Systems and Technology Forum, the SNTF. Looking at issues of countering economic coercion, you have both the diplomatic dynamic, but also the USTR equities. Department of Energy is a key player in a lot of these other different areas. So what role can the economic 2+2, do you think, eventually play in helping to bridge some of these gaps? Is that even possible? Another way to ask this question is, 5 years from now, what kinds of metrics or outcomes would you say are indicative of a successful economic 2+2 process within the alliance? Thank you.
Sure. it's an interesting and complicated question. I think, certainly recognize that, as you say, this is between us and Japan right now, but it certainly could be a 5+5. These are issues that span the region, that span the globe, and are critically important to be engaging bilaterally on, but beyond that, with other partners on. At present, the Department of Commerce and the Department of State are leading the effort and building upon the bilateral mechanisms that exist and the work that has been done to date under our respective expertises. But the reality is that if you take a look across the spectrum of all of the bilateral mechanisms that exist on the economic front with Japan, you are talking about over a dozen easily. And at a certain point, it does become incumbent upon us to be pulling in other parts of the interagency in a way that ensures that this can in fact serve as an umbrella under which we have a more strategic approach to each of the dialogues that is then implemented or executed by individual agencies. It's a work in progress, and I think that that's certainly on the agenda for discussion with our Japanese counterparts when it comes to how this will evolve. This will just be the first ministerial, but I anticipate that following this, we will want, probably at the vice ministerial level, a follow-up conversation about lessons learned and next steps, and the type of vision that you seem to be offering up. In terms of success, success could potentially be measured in a number of different ways, but if it plays out in this way, and we are able to convene on a regular basis and engage with Japan on these shared goals and think about the overarching strategy in any of these given areas, whether it is about COVID, post-COVID economic recovery, or dealing with global threats such as economic coercion. If a grand strategy is established and that kind of seeps its way down into the individual dialogues, that allows for us to have that coherence that we need and to ensure that the types of goals that are set in the 2+2 by the principles are goals that can be carried out in each of these dialogues with concrete outcomes that in fact play into that overarching goal. So in 5 years, would love to come back to this conversation and see whether we have achieved that yet. Hopefully I expect to still be here and still be focusing on these issues, but that is the goal.
And look, I would just add, Jim, this is a broader issue than just an economic relationship. I mean, I think that when you look at the U.S. Japan alliance, there are a huge number of structures in virtually every area of the relationship. Whatever, I mean, it can be on the defense side, which it can be, on the diplomatic side, technology, commercial, trade. The reality is that most of them were created to address problems in the past. The challenge is, and this is not limited to the Japan relationship, but I would say that it is one where you see it more in the Japan relationship because it's so broad and there's so many structures. It's how do you update those structures to deal with a very new set of challenges. And I think that in some cases, you can do it within the existing structures. In some cases, it may be harder to do. In some cases, you've got very new problems and very new challenges that require new approaches. So I think that this is something that is an issue as we look at this is how do we build on what we have? I mean, there is a there are two different tendencies. One is there's a tendency to want to hold on to existing structures and be really nostalgic and like we have to keep doing this because we've always done it. The other is to want to have a lot of new things. Because there's, it's kind of fun to roll new stuff out. It's something that, can be bespoke and very carefully tailored to deal with problems. I think the challenge for us as we look at the overall relationship is how do you balance between that? How do you update existing structures where they make sense and where it's possible to do? How do you come up with new structures where that's appropriate? And I think that the economic 2+2 is a good example of the fact that, look, I mean, if you really want to be honest, there was a time when there would have been people who would have objected to the idea of economic security. You had economic issues, you had security issues, and one of the challenges in the relationship is how do you manage them so that it doesn't look like one is interfering with the other. That's no longer the case. And so I think that this is a reflection of the fact that we are much more aligned on a whole range of issues than we used to be. We are dealing with very new problems, and so in some cases we need to come up with new structures. In other cases we need to modernize and update what we have, and trying to figure out which is the challenge for us.
I could just add one more thing to that. You know, in talking about the format of the 2+2, we have been trying to consider building in flexibility. And so I had spoken earlier about different buckets. You know, this is not the type of format where the agenda items are established and carry over year to year to year. We are framing the discussion under these broader concepts of how to enhance economic security and resilience, or how to recover from major shocks to the economy. And in any given year, the issue du jour could very well be different under each of those buckets. And so that allows for a flexibility that I think is critical as we really lean on this format to allow us to partner with Japan on these issues going forward.
Yeah, this theme of needing to sort of reimagine the institutions of the alliance is something that you see in a number of issue areas, including in the defense relationship as well. I'll do just one more here, and I'm going to read it. It's an online question from Mark Mannion of the Congressional Research Service, also for you, Pam, forgive me. In the list of goals for the upcoming 2+2, I did not hear mention of coordination of overseas investment assistance. Are there any new joint projects, including trilateral ones with Australia, that are likely to be announced in the coming months? What's the status of the U.S. Japan Australia infrastructure partnership in the region, for instance, in Indonesia? I don't know if you're in a position to comment on some of that or not, Pam, but over to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, just going back to the concept that, again, this is kind of a format that sits atop all of the existing work and that tracks all of the existing work that we're doing. We will be discussing how we work together with the Japanese to address threats to the global economic order. Some of those threats could very well be, for example, economic coercion, or models that are state-driven more so than they are market-driven. And having that conversation, the way in which Japan and the United States work on development finance, as well as development aid, may very well be discussed, may very well come up in the conversation. But coming out of the 2+2 next week, you know, what we are able to report out from that is not going to be these concrete deliverables that you would expect from a dialogue or from a mechanism such as that trilateral cooperative mechanism. Instead, you know, assessing where we are and whether or not we should be pushing for more of those announcements. That's the goal of the 2+2. And that'll give direction then to teams who are working in these other contexts to step it up where needed, and to start focusing in areas where we might not traditionally have focused.
That's great. Certainly look forward to seeing what comes of that meeting next week, and we'll put you on the calendar for July 2027 to come back and give us an update. But thanks to both of you very much. I think, Edgard, as you noted, sort of the breadth of this relationship and the degree to which we're aligned is unlike anything I've ever seen before. And so really an exciting set of issues across both the traditional national security space as well as the issues you work on, Pam. So thank you both for taking the time to be here, and thanks to everyone here and online for joining us. Let's end with a round of applause for our panelists, please.